Hello, good evening, and welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur. Parshas Mishpotim, of course, comes on the back of Parshas Yisro, where the centerpiece is the Aseres HaDibros, is Matan Torah. And of course, the Aseres HaDibros, we have the Ten Commandments, which are divided into two parts. The first part, the first five, are Bein Odom L'Mokum, and the second are Bein Odom L'Chaveroi. And it's the stress on the synthesis of both. In other words, to achieve spiritual perfection, shleimus, a person needs to focus on both mitzvahs which are bein Odom L'Mokum and bein Odom L'Chaveroi. And it's very much this theme that is continued in Parshas Mishpotim. It re-emphasizes the importance not just of bein Odom L'Mokum, but also bein Odom L'Chaveroi, interpersonal mitzvahs. And I think that is borne out in the first idea that we're sharing this evening. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. So the Parsha begins famously, Ve'ele ha-mishpotim asher tosim lifneihem. These are the commandments which are being placed in front of you, says Rashi. Ve'ele moisif al rishonim. Because Rashi is troubled with the first letter of Asedra. It could just read, Eile ha-mishpotim. Why ve'ele? What's it sort of and connecting it to something else? What is that about? Says Rashi, ve'ele moisif al rishonim. It's being moisif on the rishonim, i.e., what happened in last week's Sedra, the Aseres HaDibros. Maha rishonim misinai, af elu misinai. That is what the ve'ele, the Vov, is coming to teach us. Now, the idea is that we're emphasizing that all the interpersonal mitzvahs which make up the body of Parshas Mishpotim, all the civil law, the criminal law, and the way we're meant to conduct ourselves with our fellow man, that's all in that letter Vov. That all of that comes from Har Sinai. That too is not just Bein Odom L'Mokum, it's also the Bein Odom L'Chaveroi, which is Torah Misinai. And that is borne out in the famous Bar Tanura at the beginning of Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos, everyone's favorite. It starts off with a transmission chain, with a process how the Torah was transmitted down the generations. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, u'mosru Yeshua, v'Yeshua l'Zakenim, v'Zakenim l'Neviim, v'Neviim mosruha l'Anshe Knesset HaGdola. The question that the Bar Tanura, the primary commentator on Mishnayos, is troubled by is, why is that Hakdama, that introduction to Pirkei Avos over here? Is that not true for all other Mishnayos? Mishnayos is just the sort of the body of Torah Shebal Peh. It was the body of knowledge of Torah which was transmitted down the generations, and then Rabbi edited the Mishnayos, many centuries later. So that's why doesn't this line of this opening paragraph of Moshe kibel Torah miSinai Mosru Yeshua, Zakeinu, etc., why doesn't that appear in Maseches Brachos, the very beginning of Mishnayos? So let's read the Bar Tanura together. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Oime ani, says the Bar Tanura, I am of the opinion, Lefi sheMaseches zu einam yusedes al pirush mitzvah mitzvah HaTorah. This Masechta of Pirkei Avos, it's not like Brachos, it's not like Shabbos or Bikurim or any other Mishnah which is dealing with a specific mitzvah. Kasher Masechtas shebesh Mishnah, like all other Masechtas shebesh Mishnah, like all other Masechtas in the Mishnah. Ela kula moisrim musarim umidas. What is unique about Pirkei Avos is that it's all about Musa, about ethics, about how to improve your character and develop your personality. And in the non-Jewish world, there's plenty of self-help books and books which encourage character development, B'darkei Musa, in the way of ethics. How to conduct yourself with a friend. Therefore, Pirkei Avos begins to teach you all the ethics and teachings in Pirkei Avos. It isn't something that just came from their own thoughts and initiative. But all of Pirkei Avos, all the Musa and the Midas that is enshrined in Pirkei Avos, also come from Sinai. And that really is what the Vov of Ve'ele ha-Mishpotim is telling us, that the interpersonal mitzvahs are as important as those which are bein Odom L'Mokum, and they also come from Har Sinai. Ve'ele ha-Mishpotim. Now, these are the details. Interestingly, by Jonathan Sachs, Zichrein Levrochi, he once relayed a very interesting anecdote. Then in the 1960s, there was a Danish architect. His name was Arne Jacobsen, and he designed a very beautiful new college campus in Oxford, in England. And he wasn't content just with designing the building, but he went on to design every aspect of it, the cutlery and the crockery used in the dining hall. He supervised the planting of every shrub and plant in the college garden. And when asked why, this Danish architect replied, in the words of another architect, God is in the details. And that's what Ve'elah Mishpotim is. But the details is not just bein Adam lemokum, but bein Adam lechaveiroi. The Rabbi Salanter, the famous anecdote, when his Talmidim were preparing to bake matzahs in readiness for Pesach, they asked their Rabbi, Rabbi Salanter, what mitzvah, what chumras should we take on to make sure that our matzahs are going to be absolutely kosher lemahadrin, with all the chumras and shittas and what can we do? Said Rabbi Salanter very famously to them, there is an almana who's manning the ovens over there, a widow who's dealing with the baking and the ovens. When the matzah bakeries can be very stressful and a very intense place, the clock is ticking, you don't want it to become chometz. When you interact with that almana, make sure you are pleasant and you don't shout and you're calm and you don't violate the prohibition not to cause distress or any anguish to the almana, because that's also the hidur of matzahs. That's Ve'elah Mishpotim. Reb Hutner used to say that the remarkable thing about the Chofetz Chaim was not that he wrote the Mishnah Berurah, which is the most remarkable work, the detail. If you learn the Mishnah Berurah and the Biur Halacha and the Sha'ar Tzion, the genius of the Chofetz Chaim is certainly there and visible. And those largely relate to mitzvahs bein Adam lemokum. And it wasn't the fact that the Chofetz Chaim wrote Shmiras HaLashon and the Sefer Chofetz Chaim, which gave him his name, which relate largely to our interaction with other people, how we talk and relate to other people. Says Rav Hutner, the remarkable thing about the Chofetz Chaim is that he could write both the Mishnah Berurah and the famous Sefer on Shmiras HaLashon, the Chofetz Chaim, which one is to do with bein Adam lemokum, one is to bein Adam lechaveiro, that he was able to be a master of both. And that really is what Ve'elah Mishpotim is teaching us, that for spiritual perfection, for a real harmony and a shleimus in a person's avodah, one has to master both bein Adam lemokum and bein Adam lechaveiroi. And Ve'elah Mishpotim is teaching us that just like, as Rashi tells us, how Rishonim were misinai, af elu misinai, so too all the teachings in Parshas Mishpotim, which focus largely on bein Adam lechaveiro, are also misinai. Okay, let's press on. Now, the opening psukim deal with the halachas of Eved Ivri. Let's read the opening psukim. I'm in paragraph number 2, the third box on the page. Ve'elah Mishpotim atestosim lifneihem ki sikne Eved Ivri sheishon miyavud v'shvius yetze chofshi chinam. He works for 6 years, up to 6 years, and then the Shemitah year he'll go out in Begapa Yova, Begapa Yetze, etc., etc. Im Adon of Yitin le'isha v'yoda le'bonim b'bonus, etc. V'im Omar Yomo ha'Eved. And if the Eved decides not to go out at Shemitah, and he says, "O havti es Adoni es ishti v'esbonai lo yetze chofshi," I don't want to go out. V'higishe Adonov el ha'Elohim, v'higishe el adeles. He goes to court and he goes to the doorpost, or el hamezuzah. V'rotza Adonov es oznoi, and the master, the Adon, bores a hole in his ear, b'martzeah, with this implement. V'avodoi la'olam, and he will serve beyond Shemitah. La'olam means to the Yovel. So the famous topic of Eved Ivri, that if he chooses not to go out at the Shemitah year, as his right, but instead chooses to stay on, then he has to have the Ritziyah, he has to have this hole born in his ear, and go through that whole process. Says Rashi, famous Rashi, quoting the Gemara in Kiddushin, Umar ra oizen lahartziyah mikol sha'ivarim shebaguf. Why are we boring a hole in the Eved's ear? Why dafka the ear? Omer Rabbi Yochanan Zakai, oizen zoi sheshoma al Har Sinai. This ear which heard on Har Sinai, lo signov v'holach v'gonov, and he went and stole. Tarat said you gotta bear a hole in it. And if he didn't steal, but he just sold himself because he had some debts, whatever it was, oizen sheshoma al Har Sinai ki li bnei Yisrael avodim v'holach v'kona odon la'atzman. He went and and went and found a master for himself, again he's got the Odin has got to take him to the doorpost, and Rotza Adonovis Ozno B'Martzeya. Now, the question is this. I've got three questions, and the following questions I heard from Rabbi Hartman, and he sort of makes a fascinating observation on this whole opening Parsha in this week's Zedra. Three questions. Question number one. I'm so sorry. Question number one. Why is it that the ear of all the organs on our face are always open? Our eyes have eyelids which can shut. Our mouth have lips which we can close. But our ears are constantly open. Why is that? What's the message, if you use it word, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the designer of the human body? Question number two. Sometimes you come across a Gemara, and you come across an Amoira, and his Eved, they have sort of personal assistants, they have people who help them, and the Eved is called Shmaya. Now you come across it once, and then the second time you come across it, you think, that's interesting. The other Amoira also had an Eved called Shmaya. But then you come across it more and more, and you realize this is actually a generic name, like Caesar, like Paro. This is a generic title. Well, so too, all the servants, or many servants in the Gemara, are called Shmaya. Why is that? Question number three, and going back to this Rashi, why dafka is it the Eved who has to pierce his ear? Surely that's true for all Averas. The Rashi said, Oizen Zois Sheshom al Har Sinai Lo Signov V'holach V'nignav Tirtze, he's got to have his ear pierced. But wouldn't it be logical that's true for every Avera a person does? This ear that heard Shmir Shabbos, that heard Lo Signov, that heard Lashon Hara, that heard you've got to keep kosher, that heard all the 613 mitzvahs, all the Aseres HaDibros, and violated them, then he should have his ear pierced. Why is it dafka the Eved who has his ear pierced? Surely any Avarian, any person who violates any of the Torah, has also violated Oizen Zois Sheshom al Har Sinai, whatever it is. So why is it the Eved? So three questions. Why is it that the ears are always open? Question number two, why are servants called Shmaya in the Gemara? And question number three, why dafka does the Eved pierce his ear? Surely it's true for all Averas that a person may have violated. So to explain the answer to these three questions, we need to take a step back. The word for a human being in Torah is Adam. What is that about? What is the name? The name in Lashon HaKodesh, all the names go to the very root, the essence of the word, as we've discussed many times. Adam is connected to the word Adamo, and it refers to the potential of a human being. Ma'oid is the same letters rearranged, that a person has enormous potential and he can achieve great things. Adamo, which is again connected to the word Adam, land, if you think about it, is endless potential. I can plant all types of vegetation, fruit and flowers. As opposed to a behemoth, in contrast, there is no potential. A cat isn't going to develop into anything else. A human being has potential to have animalistic tendencies, or to develop himself and have very spiritual leanings, and to become ultimately like an angel, because he has endless potential. Adam is an expression of potential. Behemoth is no potential. In fact, the word behemoth, the Maral and others say that it's a combination of the words ba ma, which is really saying what you see is what you get, or ma ba, what's there already. It's this is it. That's it. The power of human potential is the most important midah for growth. Is listening. In other words, the ear, the ability to listen, that is the most important part of a person when it comes to developing his potential and being an Adam. The oizen, to listen, that's really also in a connection to last week's Zedra. Vayishma Yisro, what singled Yisro out was his ability to listen and to internalize the call of the Torah. Vayishma Yisro, mashmua shama ba, more than anybody else. Shamu am yirgazim, people hear, but they didn't really hear. Vayishma Yisro, he really heard. So the point is that the Eisen it relates to the power of human potential, and it's the most important midah, i.e. listening is the most important midah when it comes to growth. Therefore, for example, Rabbi Yonah explains that a person an Odon who injures his Eved, then he has to pay damages. He causes a bruise, he causes even, whatever it is, some serious damage to him, he'll have to pay. However, Chorsha, the Gemara says, if he causes him to lose his hearing, then noisin demei kula, then he's got to pay the full amount of the Eved goes free. Why? Because that's the most fatal damage. Because listening is the most important midah for growth and for developing who the person is, the Odom, the potential of the man. Now with that, under that idea, that concept, we can explain our three questions. Why is it that the ears are constantly open? The answer is because we have to be alert the whole time to hear the call of Hashem. We need to constantly grow and continually listen, and therefore there is no natural plug, as it were, when it comes to the ears. We need to constantly grow. Why is it that the Avodim are called Shmaya? Why is it that Abaya, Rava, Ravashi all had servants by this name? The answer is that it's not a name, but it's a function. It's telling me what the role of an Eved is. An Eved is to listen to the Odon and to be constantly there for the Odon in service to him. And that explains the third question as well. Why is it that the person, the Eved Dafka, has to have his ear pierced and not any other Avarian, any other person who commits any Avera? The same Svara of Rashi would apply. Just like this ear heard any of the other mitzvahs and defied them, he should have his ear pierced. The answer is no. Because when a person chooses to be an Eved Hashem, that's Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. We're listening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when he takes another master and he chooses not to go free and to put himself into servitude to another master, he's undermining his being an Eved Hashem and being an Odom and fulfilling his potential fully. And ultimately that's saying my ears are not tuned in to the right station. And therefore it's the Eved. If a person slips and does an Aveira, that's not denying who he is. We slip, we're humans, we make mistakes. But if a person chooses not to be an Eved Hashem and chooses to take another master, he's essentially saying that my ears are not tuned in to the right station. I should be tuned in to being a servant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and not to this particular master, and that's why his ears are pierced. So, very interesting insights from Rabbi Hartman regarding the Eved at the beginning of this week's Parsha. Let's move on. The Parsha later on deals with, as we've said, civil damage and all types of civil and criminal laws. Let's go to Perek Chaf Aleph, where we're talking about arguments between men and physical assault and grievous bodily harm and that sort of concept. Says the pasuk in Perek Chaf Aleph, pasuk Yudches, V'chiyirivun anoshim, if men are fighting with each other, v'hiko ishes reyehu, and a man hits his friend be'even with a stone or be'egrov with his fist, v'lo yomos v'nofel ha'mishkov, im Yaakov v'salech bachus ha'mishanta v'nika ha'maki rak shifte yitein v'rape yirape. If the person doesn't die from the assault of the other person, but he's caused physical damage, then v'rape yirape. And again, you've got a whole perek in Baba Kama dealing with how you assess personal injury and things like that. But v'rape yirape is a famous two words in the Torah. And the Gemara in Baba Kama, in paragraph 3, the second box there, the Gemara in Baba Kama, Pei Hei Omid Aleph, famously says, v'rape yirape mikan shenitin rishus l'roife l'rapos. From these two words, the doctor is given permission to heal and to administer his medication. Says Rashi, why do I need a pasuk for that? Says Rashi, V'loi amrinan rachmona mochi v'iyumasi, because a person shouldn't say, well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him this knock, this blow, v'iyumasi, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu should only heal him, and therefore a doctor is not allowed to intervene. Kamash Malon, the pasuk says, v'rape yirape, that a doctor is allowed to intervene medically. And we don't say Rachmana Mochi v'yumasi, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hit the person and let HaKadosh Baruch Hu deal with it, as it were. Let him only be healed through natural means without any medical intervention. Tosfos interestingly adds, and this, by the way, we mentioned this last year, and I'll mention the opening lines of the Chofetz Chaim, but I'm only mentioning this because we didn't actually do the main point of the Chofetz Chaim, and that's what I want to do this evening. So V'im Toima, Freg Toisus there in Baba Kama, so we could have learned this concept of we could have learned that from just, you could have said once. Why is it a double lashon? That I would have thought that a person gets some sort of illness not through another person. He wasn't hit or attacked by another person, but he just got an illness from Shemaim. I might have thought that that if another person hits the person, I understand that. But if he gets an illness from Shemaim without, not brought about by another person, I might have thought maybe in fact you should let HaKadosh Baruch Hu take it away in the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought it. Kamash Malon Deshari, that a doctor is allowed to intervene both regarding illness that came through another person or illness that came through not another person, through HaKadosh Baruch Hu as it were directly. Now, the Chofetz Chaim says something very interesting. We discussed this last year. I'll just read this briefly as a sort of a chazar of what we mentioned. See the difference between medication that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Reifei Kol Basa, and a human doctor. The Reifecha is a soft fei. Merape keherefai, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu heals a person instantaneously without below yagia v'omo v'samim charifim. A person, let's say, is not feeling well, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu can take away that illness without any exertion on the part of the chola, without any medication, without any treatment. Sholech dibra v'yarpei. HaKadosh Baruch Hu just says, right, you'll be healed, the person will be healed. Lo kein b'bos v'adam. But when it comes, and that's, with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intervention and healing, it's softer because it's more pleasant, it's less intrusive. He doesn't have to do anything to the person, HaKadosh Baruch Hu just takes it away. Hence the silent fei of Ani Hashem Roifecha, the fei without a dot on it. Lo yichin b'bos v'adam. But that's not true with medical human intervention. Ksiv v'rapoy yirape, there's a dogesh in the pei. B'shtei pei and v'shneim b'dogesh chozog, which means hard. That a person has got to take medication, may have to undergo painful treatment. Sometimes with operations, and sometimes for an extended period of time. When a person, Rachmana, is not well, or we know of other people who are not well, we daven Refo'enu Hashem v'nei Rofei, with a fei, not with a pei. That any healing should be from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is softer and easier and less painful, rather than through a human doctor, as it were. Of course, the person needs to go to a doctor, he goes to a doctor, but our tefillah should be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should take away any illness through heavenly means, not through difficult human means. Now that we actually mentioned last year, but what I want to add is the main piece of the Chofetz Chaim on this pasuk, which I didn't say last year. Here we go. This is the last box on the page. Very interesting insight of the Chofetz Chaim. From this pasuk of V'rapa Yirape, the Gemara in Baba Kama derives that permission for the doctor to administer medication. V'rashi sham, v'lo amrin rachmana mochi v'iu masi, and see Taisus, etc. Mikol zeh muchach leheja. From all of this, you see something fascinating. Shekol inyonei tsar shemizdamin la'odom. All types of difficulty and pain that a person has, va'afilum echod mecharfo megadfo. Even if somebody curses him, or embarrasses him, or shouts at him, hakol hu min hashamayim. Really, it comes from heaven. Ela shemegalgen chayv aladei chayv. HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose a guilty person to do another aveira of embarrassing or hurting another person. Or it's your averas that are causing you this embarrassment, this being shouted at, or this assault. Even if the other person hit the victim on purpose, this also comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's also part of Hashgacha Pratis, and also we apply the concept of Megalglin Choiv Alidei HaChayiv, that a person who is guilty about another aspect, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will use him as an instrument, and therefore will make him further guilty, further chayiv. V'raya brura lezeh, last paragraph. Hush me'akos v'hanal. There's a raya brura, there's a clear raya for this. Hamedaber be'inyan meriva ben ish l'reyehu. When it comes to talking about, from this pasuk, that two men are involved in a fight. Kakosu v'chi rivun anoshim v'hiko ish es reyehu. Two men are fighting, and one man hits the other man. V'imkein, hamuka ba'atzma hu gam kein chayiv. The muka, the person hit, is also to some degree chayiv. He shouldn't have been involved in the argument. He could have run away. Why was he raising the temperature and shouting and arguing back? He could have walked away from it. And the Gemara is referring on that. Rashi says, in other words, the Chavetz Chaim is making a brilliant observation. Think of the context of the pasuk. That one man hits the other man, and he causes damage. That a doctor is allowed to intervene and offer medical assistance. Says Rashi, quoting the Gemara Baba Kama, that you see from here that the doctor is allowed to administer medication. Says Rashi, don't say that it came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should therefore be the one to take it away, and you can't go to a doctor. Kamashman, you can. Hang on a second. We're talking about an assault that happened from another person. That's called Rachmana Mochi. Yes, says the Chavetz Chaim, that even if somebody came along and hit you, even if there was a car accident, it means that it's coming from another person. That's called Rachmana Mochi. That ultimately is coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the Chavetz Chaim's point. You see it from the pasuk. He says, so you see, even though it may be through another human being, he is still called. That assault is still called min hashamayim. And this is the famous example with David HaMelech, that Shimi ben Gera cursed David HaMelech, that's a terrible curse. And he threw stones at David HaMelech, and he threw dust and earth at him. Heishiv David, and famously David HaMelech replied, Hashem Omer Kalel. Hashem said to him, curse. This is not Shimi ben Gera. He is just the vehicle, the instrument, but ultimately it's coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's like a person's coming with a stick and hitting you. So you're shouting at the stick. It's the person that's coming. So too with David HaMelech, he understood that really it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu behind the curse of Shimi ben Gera. And of course, Shimi ben Gera is going to be chayav for it, and he's guilty as a Baal Bechira, he shouldn't have done it, and he was punished. But ultimately, David HaMelech understood that I've got to see where this comes from. And ultimately, it comes from a good place. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing it for the benefit of a person. Through that embarrassment, a person's averas will be wiped out. And there's no point in responding to the person who's embarrassing you, because he's the stick. He's just a vehicle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is using. He should be grateful and show thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given him this kapara, this atonement, and saying, fantastic, Baruch Hashem, maybe it's avoided worse things. And that's what the Gemara says in Gittin, those people who are humiliated and don't respond in kind, the Pasuk says beautiful things about them. So you see a very beautiful piece from the Chavetz Chaim explaining this Rashi. When the Pasuk says V'rapa Yerapeh, we're talking about human caused damage, and that's what needs medical attention. And still, the Torah, Rashi says, from the Gemara in Baba Kama, why does the Pasuk need to give me a heter for the doctor to intervene? V'rapa Yerapeh, because we don't say Rachmana Mochi v'yu Masi. We don't say that this comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought this along and HaKadosh Baruch Hu clear it. No, a doctor is allowed to intervene. But you see, even human assault is called Rachmana Mochi, because ultimately it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu behind it, and a person, It's a lofty madrega should recognize that any difficulty that comes his way, yes, the person shouldn't have done it. But ultimately it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's good for the person, it should be a kapara for him, and a person should not hit back at the person who embarrassed him, who shouted or hit him, but really to internally understand that there was something that needed correcting, and it should be a kapara for that person. Very interesting observation of the Chofetz Chaim. So just to summarize the three ideas that we've said, the number one is ve'eila ha-mishpotim. The vav, as Rashi says, seems to be unnecessary, and therefore it's telling me that it's moisif ala rishonim, ma rishonim misinai af elu misinai. That just like in Har Sinai, you had the luchais, which of course came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, both ben Adam lechaveiro and ben Adam lemakom. Or Parshas Mishpotim is re-emphasizing the importance of interpersonal mitzvahs, of those mitzvahs which have been Odom L'Chaveiro, and therefore it's that synthesis of bein Odom L'Chaveiro, bein Odom L'Mokum that is developed, as it were, in Parshas Mishpotim, and that's really what the Baratunura says in the beginning of Pirkei Avos. That just we have the tradition, the transmission process. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, Masar Masur Yeshua, Yeshua Zekanim, Zekanim Neviim, etc. That whole chain is dafka put in Pirkei Avos to teach us that bein Adam lechaveiro, those things which emphasize the interpersonal, are also from Sinai. And as Rabbi Yisrael Salan said in the Matzah Bakery. Okay, and then we ask the questions about the Eved, why the ear is always open, why the Eved servants are called Shmai in the Gemara, and why Dafka the Eved has his ear pierced, any Avarin should have his ear pierced. The answer is that really listening goes to the root of what humanity is. That Odom, man, is an expression of potential, and a person who chooses not to listen and takes on another Eved, for another Odom for himself, and decides to tune out from Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, he clearly demonstrates that he's not tuned into the right station, and he needs to have his ear pierced. And that's why the Eved is called a Shmaya, because it's not a name, but it's a function of a role. And therefore the ears are constantly open, because we constantly need to grow and listen to be attuned to the Kul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then, as we've just discussed, V'rapa Yirapeh, the very beautiful insight of the Chofetz Chaim. Thank you.